Scott Keyes at Think Progress wrote an article that was completely eye-opening to me about homelessness. He says, quote, "It is cheaper to give homeless people a home than it is to leave them on the streets. That's not just the opinion of advocates working to end homelessness, nor is it the opinion of homeless people themselves. It is a fact that has been borne out by studies across the country from Florida to Colorado and beyond." Now, the most recent example is in Charlotte, North Carolina. The government set up something called More Place. It's an apartment complex with 85 units, all for homeless people. Each resident is required to contribute 30% of his or her income, which includes any benefits like disability, veterans, or Social Security, and they have to put that towards rent. And the rest of the housing costs, which total approximately $14,000 per person annually, it's covered by a mix of local and federal government grants as well as some private donations. And in the first year alone, get this, researchers found that More Place saved taxpayers $1.8 million. Now, how is that even possible? So, in other words, the government paying for people to have this tiny little one-room apartment, that actually was less expensive than just letting people live out on the street and being homeless. Now, why is that? Well, let me give you some more information on this here. It basically the savings comes from two primary areas: healthcare and incarceration. Residents of More Place collectively visited the emergency room 447 fewer times in the year after getting housing. Similarly, arrests dropped 78%. Now, of course, there were opponents who were worried that homeless people would cause problems in the subsidized apartments, but only 15 tenants had gotten in trouble and were asked to leave. So what we're looking at here is an example of a solution that actually worked for homelessness. Now, I get it, man. I mean, a lot of people might say, yeah, but you know what? Aren't you incentivizing people to not get their own place and work themselves if the society is just going to give them a place to live anyway? And I do think that there's merit to that argument if the place that you give them is better or bigger or nicer than a place somebody would live if they work a full-time job and they rent a different place. But what we're talking about here, we're not talking about any level of opulence. We're not talking about anything lavish. We're not talking about something that, you know, people would typically spend money on. We're talking about this tiny little box, this like tiny one-bedroom box that just has your bare necessities, and that's it. And to do something like that, to give homeless people just this tiny little room, you know, incredibly cheap, tell them, well, here's the deal. You're giving 30% no matter what income you have, 30% is coming to pay for this just automatically, and the rest of it will be funded through these different grants or whatever. That works, man. That works. That makes sense. You haven't set up a poor incentive because it's not an ideal place to live where people could just live there without working and it's, you know, really nice. So it makes sense, and I think the bottom line about this is if you're actually a fiscal conservative, so if you actually care about reducing debt, lowering the deficit, not spending money on the poor, which I know a lot of right-wingers, they get incensed at the idea of looking after people in society because they blame poor people for their poverty. They don't think there's very many systemic factors that are in play. Well, even if that is what you believe, then you should just flat out 100% be in favor of this, because this is your tax dollars funding these people less. I know it's counterintuitive, but the savings from these people ending up in the emergency room and in jail, the savings that come as a result of that show that you'll actually save money if we just fund these tiny little apartments for them and just give them the absolute bare minimum to survive. I don't know any other way around it, man. I'm a guy who believes in evidence. I believe in facts. And when you show me something that actually worked and it's a reasonable idea, I can change my position. And this right here swung me from I didn't really have a position on how to approach the issue of homelessness. I mean, I'm obviously in favor of social safety nets, and I'm obviously in favor of things like food stamps and welfare. But this idea right here, I think, is even better, and we should probably try to implement this not just on a state level, not just at a local level, but probably on a federal level as well.